Welcome back to the channel, guys. Temporary background for now, and it's part of the reason why I haven't been able to get these videos out as quickly as possible, but it's another NFL divisions prediction video, and today we're talking about the AFC West. So the Kansas City Chiefs have already played part of this division, obviously. And of course, you've got the LA Chargers. A lot of expectation for them going into this season. Can they put another foot forward and go that extra step? Then you've got, of course, the Denver Broncos, headlined by Russell Wilson, of course, and the new head coach, Sean Payton, and the Las Vegas Raiders. So very interesting to see what will come of this division. I don't think Kansas City will necessarily be sitting on the bottom for very long, but let's just get stuck into it straight away. So finishing last for me, I'm predicting the Raiders to finish there. I just don't trust the head coach is a big reason why. Josh McDaniels, I don't know how good of a head coach he really is. He obviously struggled last season. It's a tough division, it's a tough conference, the AFC, but ultimately I think they've got like enough good pieces to sort of make a run. They just haven't been able to. Having said that though, Derek Carr going to Garoppolo, there's not much of a difference there in terms of quarterback potential and potential in wins. Having said that though, Garoppolo did show how capable he was as a quarterback providing wins for San Fran. But I think you've got to really look at that San Fran just system and the reason being why they got so many wins, not necessarily dictated to Garoppolo, although when he was out it did show a stark contrast. I don't think it's necessarily going to translate to this Raiders team for the quarterback. And I mentioned they have a nice few pieces on this roster. The big name is Max Crosby. He is the key player. He can be anything. I've predicted him to have an outstanding year, even though the Raiders will likely be the bottom team in this division. I still think he's obviously going to be capable of having such a fantastic year because it'll mean the defense is probably on the field more often than not, and given more opportunity for someone like Max Crosby, who just has a motor for every single down to make a play, tackle for loss, sacks, just getting a hand to it, blocks, all that sort of thing. He can have a fantastic year regardless of the team success. Then of course on the flip side, you've still got one of the best receivers in the game. Davante Adams is no slouch, even though he's getting up there in years, past 30 I believe now. That doesn't matter. And I think receiving from Derek Carr last year, he was obviously force-fed a lot and it didn't really translate. And then on the flip side, in terms of your offensive options with the running backs, Josh Jacobs is coming back. That has finally been resolved. He's a very, very, very good running back. And it's good to see him coming back from a Raiders perspective, but I think it's just too top heavy. That's the ultimate thing, along with the head coach question marks there. Another weakness for them that I can see, as well as many others, because they're graded as one of the worst secondaries in the league. I think they're third worst as of PFF, Pro Football Focus. So that's a very, very bad stat to have. If you've got a bad secondary, you're going to have points scored against you quite a lot. And even though the season hasn't started just yet for the Raiders, I think it's going to be a tough one for them. So even though the defensive line headlined by Max Crosby, Chandler Jones, even though there's been some off-field issues of late for him, and rookie Tyree Wilson, who is regarded by some people as the best edge rusher in the class. Obviously, Will Anderson went to the Texans before him, but Tyree Wilson's got some big raps. So this defensive line could be outstanding, but it's not really going to be helped if they can't cover for long enough. And so if you don't know, in these videos, I give a general sort of rough estimate as to where I think their record will stand each team come the end of the season. And for this Raiders, I think it's going to be a very, very tough year. I'm going to go 5 wins for the season. I think they're ultimately a better team than that, but just the infrastructure around this team and going off past seasons and the like, I see it being another difficult season for this Raiders team. Coming in at third, I've got the Denver Broncos. Russell Wilson, Sean Payton, a new sort of era with this Broncos team. Obviously last season under Nathaniel Hackett, it was an absolute dumpster fire, a train wreck, whatever you want to call it, plane crash. Everything I think works for the situation because Russell Wilson from Seahawks to Denver, it was a completely different player. And you know, you got to sort of understand, you got to put it in perspective. This is a guy going from a different system that he's been used to his whole career. So there has to be a little bit of slack given, but at the same time, I don't think Russell Wilson does himself any favors, particularly off the field with his videos and ads and all the sort of PR, I guess, around him, the image that he wants to present across to the public, I don't think he helps himself. And that's been highlighted by his head coach, Sean Payton, who basically told him to pull his head in. There was a few more expletives I think he used, but he definitely needs to sort of pull his head in, get into line, and produce on the field this season. A bit of a renaissance. And so I do think he will improve based on last year because it was so bad. You can really only go up. They did finish last in this division last season. So I think it can only go up. But I don't necessarily it's going to be a huge jump. I still think there's obviously two better teams in this division, being the Super Bowl champs and the Chargers, who are a stacked team, big expectations on them. So I think there's still a lot more room for this Denver Broncos team to improve. And so I think it's a blessing for Russell Wilson that he's got Sean Payton on his side. Obviously, he's going to be hard on him. We've already seen that. We talked about the sort of quotes directed at Russ. But I think with his work in New Orleans, previously Sean Payton, with someone like Drew Brees, this is a quarterback who had a fantastic career. Obviously, just the one Super Bowl. But this is a guy that works well with quarterbacks. He knows his system, he can implement it, and Russell Wilson is more than capable. We've seen it before. I think one thing that people seem to forget is that last season, Denver actually had a very, very solid defense. It was the offense, obviously, that let them down big time. And I think this is the same prospect this season. Their defense is largely the same. They've added a couple pieces here and there. So I think the defense can really sort of propel this team to new heights based on last season. But I do still think there will be limitations of this offense. And you go to the pieces outside of Russ, Jerry Jeudy, a few injuries here and there. You don't know how often he's going to be on the field, and you don't know if he can sort of make that next jump that other receivers from his class and even draft classes since then have made. And then Cortland Sutton, you know what you're going to get from him, but what else on this offense is there? Javonte Williams is coming back, the running back, off an ACL, his rookie season cut short. But that's a very worrying stat. The ACLs, running backs coming back from that, don't tend to set the world alight again. And so I think it will be a very difficult season again offensively. It will be better, but the pieces just there don't lend me to believe that this is going to be a high-powered offense. I absolutely love the addition of Samaje Perine, to be fair. I think as an RB2 that can sort of get that load at the start of this season in case Javonte Williams isn't really there yet, which makes sense. ACL injuries, Breece Hall from the Jets is another example. He's likely going to get less carries to start, less touches than Delvin Cook. So I think it could be similar, and Perine is a great piece. He was great with the Bengals behind Joe Mixon when Mixon was out, or if they needed Perine, he was very, very available and efficient. And so in terms of records for this Broncos team, I find it hard to give them more than 7 wins, honestly, this season. The number of factors that I've mentioned. This defense can be very, very great again, but I don't see much of an uptick in this offense. And that is the biggest reason for me why I don't see them getting more than 7 wins this season. And so in second place, I do have the Chargers. Even though I'm recording this after the Kansas City loss, they lost to the Lions. Patrick Mahomes' first loss, I think, in September ever. Definitely his first loss in the first game of the season, but I'm not going to get all, around that sort of hype and whether or not they're going to have the pieces or whatever. We'll talk about them, but I think the Chargers will be close. It will be close, but ultimately I'm not going to bet against the Kansas City Chiefs to not finish first. But the Chargers, the expectations there are massive. It's been huge in past seasons. They obviously did make that step last season to get into the playoffs, but it was ultimately a failure, I think, because the Jacksonville game coming back, as in the Jaguars coming back from 4 touchdowns down at halftime, Trevor Lawrence throwing 4 picks, absolutely absurd, and then they just completely fell apart in that second half. And so I think in terms of the whole NFL, the whole landscape, Brandon Staley, there's probably the most pressure on him in terms of head coaches, I believe. Barring those teams that are low down in terms of their record potential, the Chargers need to make a move this season, and I think especially if they don't make playoffs, then Brandon Staley has got to go. But let's talk in a more positive light, what this team will be good at, what are their key players, and what are they going to be able to do this season. Obviously, this offense could be absolutely anything. They've got Justin Herbert, their franchise quarterback, who's been great through the first couple of seasons of his career. Broken records, of course. And it was a bit banged up last season, as were his receivers. So this is a big talking point. Can they stay fit and healthy? The quarterback obviously is the most important, so he needs to stay fit. Otherwise, that's going to limit his performances. So having the likes of Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, the rookie, under the offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore from the Dallas Cowboys, who I think is a great pickup and will help them immensely, they could be one of the most high-powered offenses in the league. And that's not to mention running back Austin Eckler, the dual threat, runs, carries, catches, everything. Additionally, I think an underrated factor that was sort of maybe missed by a lot of people is Rashawn Slater, their left tackle, was out for basically the whole season. And that's a big talking point. Your left tackle is probably the most vital position on the offensive line, and he's one of the best in the league. So not having him really hampered this Chargers team. Just injuries in general, and on the defensive side as well. JC Jackson, massive pickup from the Patriots. He was out for a large majority of the season. Joey Bosa as well. These top players, they need to stay fit and healthy if the Chargers are to actually take that next step and win maybe a couple of playoff games this season. So I think ultimately at the start of this season, they are set up for success. It'll be a very, very big failure if they don't get into the playoffs at all, or if they even don't win a playoff game, I think, this season. They are potentially in pole position to maybe win this division. Out of any years gone by, Kansas City, obviously it might be too soon to make this take, but Kansas City looking vulnerable in terms of, do they have enough options on that offense? Can their defense keep them in games sometimes? There's a various few questions going on there, but I think ultimately the Chargers will still finish second. It'll be close, but they need to have a very successful postseason. And so predictions-wise for their record, I've got them with 12 wins. I think they'll be very, very solid. High-powered offense. Their defense might not be able to get stops at times, but I think Justin Herbert is one of those players that can make things happen if need be. Last drive of the game, winning drives, that sort of thing. I think it can happen for the Chargers. And while I still think they're finishing second in this division, I think they can make some noise. They're in pole position. They've got the pieces. They've just got to put it all together this season. And so, as we know already, in first place for me, the Kansas City Chiefs. You can't really bet against them, even after that loss to the Lions. Travis Kelce-less, Patrick Mahomes. It was a struggle. It was admittedly a struggle for them on offense. I mean, where do I even start with Kadarius Toney? The dude just... I don't know. Then someone like Sky Moore, who you thought might step up, didn't either. So there's a lot of question marks at that receiver position. And I think even with Kelce in this team, there's still probably question marks there. It's a lot of young players, a lot of players that, can you trust them? Because they don't have that pedigree. They don't have that wide range of, this is what they can do, this is what they're capable of. Because they're so young, they haven't seen those looks in the league just yet. Because going back to last season, they did have someone like Juju Smith-Schuster, who has been in the league for a number of years. And, depending on what you think of him, it doesn't really matter. But this is a guy that, he was a solidified receiver. You knew what you were going to get with him, and obviously he helped them win a Super Bowl. But now it's the likes of, as I mentioned, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Rashee Rice, Justin Ross. These names just, there's not much pedigree to them in terms of what they've done in the NFL. And so having said all that, I've sort of slated the Chiefs here for a bit. And I've got to remember, I'm putting them in first in this division. And it's for good reason. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid. These two guys have been the heart of this team for a number of seasons. And Travis Kelce will come back, and I think he'll be great. So ultimately, you can't really bet against them just yet, I don't think. I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff. They just won the Super Bowl. It's not going to be a Rams-type Super Bowl defense in terms of defending the Super Bowl, because that was an absolute failure. But the Kansas City Chiefs, I don't necessarily will be that dominant force, I don't think, this season. They've also got the issues with Chris Jones sitting out. He was at the game, but ultimately isn't playing at the moment. So they'd want to get that going, I think, pretty quickly, because this is a guy that was up for Defensive Player of the Year last season. He's one of the best players in the league, let alone in his position. So they'd want to get that sorted pretty quickly, because even though the defensive line, to be honest, it looked quite good against Detroit, Chris Jones is just head and shoulders above basically anyone in the league. Maybe another factor that sort of brings this high-powered team down is Eric Bieniemy is no longer there, the offensive coordinator for a number of years. Hasn't still got a head coach gig yet, which is kind of baffling to me, but obviously I don't know the behind the scenes of what he's like and what he does in interviews, but he's obviously at Washington now. He's the offensive coordinator there, and I'm very interested to see how they go under him, because I think that's probably a piece that maybe goes underrated, because you think of Patrick Mahomes just being this elite guy. Obviously he is, I'm not saying he isn't. And then Andy Reid, the head coach with so much pedigree, but I don't think it's being valued enough, the loss of Eric Bieniemy as offensive coordinator. And so where do I have them in terms of their record? I think they're just going to pip the Chargers by 1 win. A 13-win season for me for the Chiefs. They'll get back on track after this Game 1 loss to the Lions. They'll get Travis Kelce back. I think the word is he's not going to be out for long. So, but regardless of that as well, I think they still just do have a team capable of winning this division and capable of getting a high seed in the AFC. But that is it for this video. My predictions on the AFC West. Let me know yours in the comments below. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on my predictions and on your own. And if you did enjoy this video, consider liking, consider subscribing. I've got the last couple of divisions coming out very shortly as well. Been a bit tight on time, so I would have loved to get them out before the whole season started, but just hasn't happened like that. But regardless, subscribe to see them coming up, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.